So imagine that you're in a room full of people, at work, in class, or at a family gathering, and someone says something that feels wrong to you. Everyone nods in agreement, but you also feel that pull to nod along or to stay quiet. But have you ever wondered how did that reflex develop in you? It was actually trained into you one small moment at a time when you were maybe just 4 years old. I'm Ayan, and today I want to tell you about something disturbing. Before you turned 5, you went through a training program. Of course, nobody called it that. It felt like love and it felt like safety. But it installed something in your brain. A system that decides which thoughts are safe, which questions are allowed, and which authorities you must never challenge. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how it all works. We'll trace it from the dinner table to the playground and to the voice in your head that still tells you to stay quiet when you don't want to. And here's the thing, only when you start to see it can you actually start to break free from it as well. So let's go. Let me tell you about Sarah. When Sarah was 4 years old, she asked her father why the sky was blue. He smiled, delighted by her curiosity, and began to explain something about light and wavelength. But Sarah interrupted him. "No, Daddy," she said, her small face serious. "I mean, why did someone make it blue instead of red?" Her father paused, caught off guard by the deeper philosophical question embedded in her innocence. He could have explored this with her, discussed how the sky wasn't made by anyone, how natural laws operate independently of human intention, or how the question itself revealed a beautiful confusion between design and emergence. Instead, he glanced at his watch, noted the time, and said, "God made it that way, sweetheart. Now go and wash your hands and get ready for dinner." In that moment, executed with love and without any malice, Sarah learned her first lesson in obedience. Some questions have approved answers, and persistence beyond that boundary is inconvenient. And here is where the engine of obedience had already begun its work. Now you might be thinking that's just one moment, one question. What's the big deal? Here's the big deal. That moment happened in your childhood and in my childhood too. Maybe not the sky, maybe about money or religion or why Daddy seemed angry. But there was a moment when we all learned some doors don't open, some questions don't get answered, and pushing makes the people you need uncomfortable. And that moment was just the beginning. If you've ever felt your throat tighten before asking something real, that's the echo of that first closed door. So human babies are born helpless, completely and utterly helpless. A baby horse can walk an hour after its birth. A giraffe falls from 6 feet and starts to walk. But a human baby, it takes at least 3 to 4 years before they can even feed themselves. This extended vulnerability wires deep neural pathways for dependency during critical brain development periods. So we're born into a state where we have to trust someone completely. Mom points at something and says, "Dog," and you don't fact check her because you can't. Your survival depends on believing that she's telling you the truth. And here is where it gets interesting. The same brain circuits that learn "mother keeps me safe" also learns "mother knows what is true about the world." This is what psychologists John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth called attachment theory. The bond between infant and the caregiver isn't just emotional, it's existential. In simple terms, your first bonds don't just teach you who you love, they teach you what safe feels like, what true feels like, and what kind of person automatically gets believed. In this way, your caregiver automatically becomes your first interpreter of reality itself. So when your mother's or father's face shows fear, you learn that the situation is dangerous. Even if you can't see any danger yourself, you trust the system. And that's beautiful, right? That's how we stay alive. That's how we survive in this world. But here's the Trojan horse. That's the same trust, the trust that keeps us alive. It becomes the foundation for every authority that we'll ever obey. The neural pathway that says trust mother eventually says trust the teacher, trust the boss, trust the expert, trust the institution, trust the system. Your attachment figure, your mom, your dad, they become your first system. Personal, loving, without any malice, but a system nonetheless. And because this system is your survival, questioning it doesn't feel like intellectual curiosity. It feels like death. So you see how deeply it ingrained in us. That room full of nodding people, that same wiring that tells us to stay quiet. Now let's talk about the most powerful phrase in parenting. Because I said so. On its surface, this makes sense. If a kid's reaching for a hot stove, you don't have time for a lecture on thermal conductivity. You say no, you will save their hand, and that's fair enough. But watch what happens when because I said so isn't just for emergencies. It is the default answer. The kid asks a question and the parent shuts it down. The kid obeys. Do that over and over, and the child doesn't just learn the rule, they learn the feeling. When someone above me speaks, I shut up and go along. Do this 1,000 times, 2,000 times over the course of their childhood, and you create a mental groove, a pattern so deep that it becomes automatic. The content of the question stops mattering. What matters is authority is present. Therefore, comply. And then authority must be complied by becomes the default state. Psychologist Diana Baumrind spent years studying parenting styles, and she found something disturbing about kids that are raised in what she called authoritarian households. Places where because I said so is the law. These kids show decreased independent thinking, increased peer susceptibility, and higher anxiety when making their own decisions. Just think about that. They were trained to look outward for answers instead of inward for reasoning. The 5-year-old who has to accept because I said so just to get through the day grows into the 15-year-old who never learned to ask, but should I believe this? Or why should I believe this? And then that teenager grows into the 35-year-old who hears something on TV or from a person with a title and thinks, well, they must be right. At that point, repeated lies start to feel like the truth, and propaganda doesn't look like manipulation anymore. It just feels like the easiest story to go along with. And here is my question for you. How many times this week have you accepted something just because someone in authority said it, or someone with a large following said it? Not because you verified it, not because you reasoned through it, but because they had the title, the position, the credentials, and you thought they must be right, without any question as to why they might be right. So the next time you catch yourself agreeing just because someone has a title or a large following, or just because you've heard something so many times that it feels automatically true, pause for a moment and ask yourself, do I actually believe this? And why do I believe this? That tiny pause is going to be the first step that you'll take in loosening that old groove of automatic obedience. Now picture a playground. A 5-year-old is halfway across the monkey bars, knuckles white, tongue out, in total concentration. He reaches the last bar, drops to the sand, and sticks the landing. He is vibrating with the pure, raw thrill of "I did it." Then his dad calls out, "Good job, I'm so proud of you." That moment is very beautiful, isn't it? But watch what happens. Watch his face. That's where the shift happens. The glow of personal achievement flickers and dies, replaced by a different kind of light. The look of a performer, waiting for their grade. Before he tries the next ladder, he doesn't look at the bars, he looks at his father. In that split second, he has stopped asking, "Can I do this?" and started asking, "Is my father watching?" That right there is the first gear of the engine clicking into place. This is what behavioral psychologist B.F. Skinner discovered you could do to any organism, including us humans. You can condition specific behaviors through surgical application of rewards and punishments. Skinner's work was very brilliant for understanding how we learn, but its widespread application to how we raise our children has had a quiet, unintended consequence as well. We have raised generations of humans who are exquisitely attuned to external validation and dangerously disconnected from internal motivation. External motivation is a constant negotiation. It sounds something like, "Will this be on the test? How many likes will this get if I post it? Is the boss watching? Will this lead to a promotion or not?" It's the feeling of constantly checking the rearview mirror to see if the world is clapping for you. Internal motivation, on the other hand, is a quiet curiosity. It sounds something like, "Wait, how does this actually work? I love the way these colors look together, so I will post it online. I want to solve this problem because it's driving me crazy." It's the feeling of losing track of time because the work is the reward. The engine keeps you focused on external motivation that is transactional and quietly starves the internal motivation, which is curiosity. Educational psychologist Alfie Cohen has documented the fallout of this for decades. He found a praise paradox. Children who are constantly rewarded for achievements actually show a decreased interest in the task itself over time. So, the child who once drew pictures for the sheer joy of seeing colors hit paper becomes the teenager who won't pick up a pen unless they're asked. What's the grade for this? The natural curiosity that drives a 3-year-old to ask why 17 times in a row becomes the dull compliance of the high school student who has learned that curiosity unrewarded is curiosity wasted. The gold star, the good job, the employee of the month plaque, these aren't just encouragement. They are the engine's fuel. They train us to perform, not for the satisfaction of mastery or the pursuit of truth, but for the recognition of the system. We think we are building them up, but in reality, we are just teaching them to wait for the applause before they decide if their life has any value. In 1951, psychologist Solomon Asch conducted what would become one of the world's most famous experiments in social psychology. The setup was deceptively simple. Participants were shown a line and asked to identify which of the 3 comparison lines matched the first line's length. The answer was obvious. Even a child could do it correctly. But there was a twist. Each real participant was placed in a room with several confederates, actors who were pretending to be fellow participants. When asked to identify the matching line, the confederates all confidently gave the wrong answer. The project's question was, Would the real participant trust their own eyes or conform to the group? And the results were disturbing. Approximately 75% of the participants conformed to the incorrect majority answer at least once. Even when the correct answer was so obvious, the psychological pressure to align with the group proved overwhelming. When interviewed afterward, many participants said they knew the group was wrong but didn't want to appear foolish or create a conflict. Ash here uncovered something profound. The fear of social exclusion is so powerful that it can override even clear sensory evidence. We are, after all, social species. And why won't we be? For most of human history, ostracism from the group meant serious survival disadvantage. The individual who wandered off alone or who refused to participate in group activities or who insisted on doing things their own way, that individual was casted out, vulnerable to predators, starvation, and the countless dangers of a hostile environment. So, evolution has wired us to fear exclusion at a level far deeper than rational thought. And the engine of obedience exploits this vulnerability with ruthless efficiency. Children learn this lesson early and painfully. The elementary classroom is a laboratory of social pressure. The child who raises their hand too often becomes the teacher's pet and faces social consequences. The child who questions the assignment too persistently becomes difficult. And the child who dresses differently automatically thinks differently. Or if they refuse to participate in the agreed upon social fictions of childhood, faces the ultimate punishment: isolation. You can't sit with us, they say. Four words that contain the full force of humanity's deepest fear. And the lesson learned is clear: conformity is safety, deviation is danger. And the system, even the system of the second graders at lunch, must be obeyed. If you have ever stayed silent in a group chat, a classroom, or a meeting because you didn't want drama, you have felt this ancient wiring at work. Sigmund Freud, even with all his flaws and critiques of his work, still identified something very crucial about the human psychology. We humans internalize the voices of authority until they become indistinguishable from our own thoughts. He called this the superego, the part of the psyche that contains the moral standards and ideals we acquire from parents, teachers, and society. Initially, these standards are external. The toddler refrains from touching the lamp because the mother has said no and is watching. But eventually, the toddler refrains from touching that lamp because something inside them, something that sounds suspiciously like mother, says no, even when their mother is not present. This is also a necessary development. We do need to internalize basic ethical principles like don't harm others, don't take what isn't yours, don't kill people, and keep your promises, etc. The superego at its best is conscience. But the superego doesn't discriminate between useful internalized principles and arbitrary systematic rules. It absorbs everything: the moral and the conventional, the ethical and the procedural, the wise and the absurd. The child internalizes don't hit your sister and don't question your elders with equal weight. The result is a psyche where the voice of the system becomes indistinguishable from the voice of the self. You must have also listened to the voice of self criticism in your own head. When you make a mistake at work, does the voice tell you that you're unprofessional or not good enough? when you consider challenging a policy you disagree with? Does a voice warn you about making waves or being difficult? When you contemplate pursuing an unusual path, does a voice remind you to be realistic or think about what others will say? Those voices, reasonable though they may sometimes be, are often not yours. A simple way to spot them is if the voice in your head sounds more like a scolding teacher, parent, or boss than a curious ally, you're probably listening to the engine and not your authentic judgment. They are the accumulated residue of every authority figure, every social punishment, every moment of conformity seeking that your psyche has absorbed since birth. The superego is the engine's greatest achievement, an enforcer that requires no external power, no surveillance, no threat, just the voice in your head, speaking in first person, telling you to obey. But here is an even bitter truth that makes this more difficult to talk about. Nearly all of this is done in the name of love, or at least the appearance of it. People who say, because I said so, are usually trying to keep their children safe, teaching them how to function in a world they know can be cruel. Teachers who reward compliance are often just survivors themselves, working within a system designed to educate hundreds of students with limited resources and even less time. Even our peers, the ones who enforce social norms with a look or a laugh, are trapped in the same web of conformity, desperately seeking the same acceptance as the rest. But we must also look at the darker side of this coin. While our families act out of genuine love, larger systems like governments, authoritarian powers, have learned to mimic that same language. They drape themselves in the vocabulary of protection, unity, and the common good. They all tell us that they are keeping us safe while they are actually keeping us still. They don't really want you to be safe or want you to thrive. They want us to be predictable. So they wear the mask of a guardian to hide the face of the ruler. This engine of obedience is not a simple conspiracy. It is not a deliberate plot by a few malevolent villains to crush the human spirit. It is something much more complex. It is the result of well meaning people trying their best to prepare us for a world that rewards compliance and punishes deviation, coupled with systems of power that hijack that same instinct to maintain control in the disguise of care and protection. And this is what makes it so insidious. We can easily reject cruelty when we see it. We can fight back against obvious oppression. But how do we resist love? How do we resist care or protection? How do we rebel against the hand that claims to be protecting us? The answer is awareness. It is the conscious recognition that the same mechanisms that protect us also constrain us, that the same trust that allows learning also enables indoctrination, that the same social bonds that create community also enforce conformity. So we must learn to distinguish between the love that wants us to grow and the safety and care that wants us to stay small and predictable. The cradle of compliance is also the cradle of humanity. We cannot destroy it without destroying ourselves, but we can learn to see it. Seeing the engine doesn't mean that you have to hate your parents or resent your teachers. It means finally understanding the game that we all are trapped inside, the genuine and the manufactured alike. So you can finally choose for yourself how you want to play. Now let's go back to Sarah. Now she is 42 years old and has a daughter of her own. And last week, her daughter asked her why people have to go to work every day if they don't like their jobs. Sarah felt the familiar tug, the desire to simplify, to close the question, to provide the approved answer. Because that's what grown ups do, don't they? Honey, now finish your homework, she might have said. But she stopped herself. She remembered something, a moment from her own childhood, a question about the sky, a door that had closed before she could walk through it. Actually, Sarah said, sitting down beside her daughter, that's a really good question. Let's think about it together. Why do you think people do that? She asked. The engine sputtered for a moment, a small act of resistance in an ordinary home. Not a revolution, but a crack in the machine. It is where all change begins. So, next time you're in that room full of nodding people, remember Sarah. You can also choose to pause and open that door. In the next video, we are going to explore how these early patterns of obedience are reinforced and amplified by the cognitive shortcuts our brain develops. Mental tricks that make us loyal defenders of systems we've never consciously chosen to support. If you're seeing yourself in this video, drop a comment and let me know. Tell me where you first felt the engine at work. And more importantly, if you want to understand how to break free from these patterns, make sure that you are subscribed because we are going deep in the next one.